Welcome to The Next Word. I'm your host, Chris Warnke, and today we have a very unique and special guest. He has a heart as large as the moon, and he has a vision well beyond the stars, and that is David Rubenstein, author of How to Lead, but also American Billionaire, an amazing philanthropist. Today we have him to talk about his book, How to Lead.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
David, How to Lead, and it just what came out in the bookstores, just recently.
Yes, it was published in September, and so it's been out maybe about 6 weeks.
And I know the proceeds are going to go to, all the proceeds actually are going to the Library of Congress.
No.
So thank you.
The proceeds to this book go to the Johns Hopkins Children's Center. My first book, all the proceeds went to the Library of Congress. That was a history book.
Oh, that's wonderful. So the Children's Center, and I can tell you, having walked through the pediatric center so many times last year because of my grandson, I saw your name out there. I was so grateful to you. I can't tell you what that center meant to me and my family. So thank you for that and all the things you do. The things you do. But you started the Carlyle Group. I mean, you were the founder back in 1987, and you took that to an amazing private equity firm globally. And tell me why you were in private practice. You were public service before that, public servant. You then decided to go into this sphere. And of course, I know your mother wanted you to be a dentist, right?
Yeah, she wanted me to be called a doctor, but she thought being a dentist was better because she didn't have weekend hours.
Oh, didn't have weekend. Okay, great. But you didn't want to get into that kind of little space. So
I told her that I thought I might get arthritis in my fingers later on, so that my career might not go forward. So she said, "Okay."
Okay, that's great. I love it. So, but you went on into law, and later you went into the public service, of course, with Jimmy Carter. And you're too young for that. But then later, of course, you founded the Carlyle Group. And you've taken it to where it is today, which is enormous.
Well, I had a lot of help, but the reason I was able to start Carlyle was that I recognized at the age of 35, 36, 37 that I really wasn't that good a lawyer. You no doubt were a better lawyer than I was. I was not that great a lawyer, and I didn't enjoy it that much. So when you're not very good at something, you don't enjoy it very much, you probably should look for something else. So I found the idea of doing an investment firm in Washington. There had not been a private equity firm here. And I got some good partners who knew what they were doing, and we started it. But one of the lessons that came out of the book, and that come out of my experience, is this: to be really good at something, you have to love it. You have to have a passion for it. If you don't have a passion for it, you're not going to really be that successful. Nobody ever won a Nobel Prize hating what they do and wanting to work just 9 to 5, 5 days a week because they didn't really like what they're doing. You have to love it. And I'm fortunate that I found something I love in my career, and that I got involved in philanthropy and other things that I really love.
And by the way, in all your interviews, and I'll talk a little bit about that too, but all these themes keep coming up about the fact that people, and the big thing for that I notice too, that you also have to know that you're going to fail sometimes.
Yes, failure is wonderful, though it wouldn't seem to be the case when you're actually failing at something.
Right.
But if you learn how to fail, you learn how to pick yourself up really and get back on your feet and do something. Everybody in the book that I interviewed, about 30 some people, all failed at something in life. Even Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, everybody had failures. And so you learn from the failures. And so if you meet somebody at the age of 40 who says he or she has never failed at anything, they are not likely to be that successful going forward, and they may be also lying, because most people do fail. I
found that fascinating. Of course, in reading your interviews with Bill Clinton and George Bush, they both failed. They both failed at one point in their careers, whether they lost an election or.
Both of those guys, both of those former presidents ran for Congress and got defeated. Think about it. They got elected president of the United States, but they got defeated running for Congress.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which I know you were close to it for a lot of reasons, of course, her love of opera. And you talk to her about why did she love opera so much? And I was fascinated when she talked about early in life, when she was 11 years old, when she met Dean Dixon. You talked about, right? And Dean Dixon was a conductor, African-American, back in late 1940s. But he was never called a maestro. And she talked about that. And she said that he finally left the United States. And then he came back, all this acclaims from Europe and elsewhere. And but that got her into the love of opera. But I can't imagine. And frankly, it may have been a life lesson for her too, in terms of the civil rights, the beginning of this, her attitude towards civil rights, because frankly, a lot of that occurred in this country in the late 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and we go on. But I mean, I was just fascinated to hear her say that.
She was a woman who was extremely bright and an outstanding law school student, first in her class at Harvard Law School, first in her class at Columbia Law School, and she still couldn't get a job very easily because there was so much discrimination against her because she was a woman, also because she was Jewish, and also because she was pregnant. And those three things made it very difficult for her to get a job. She finally got a job teaching, which wasn't her first choice, but ultimately she turned out to be a great litigator and really paved the way for other women to be great litigators, but also she did so much in gender discrimination cases that ultimately she helped change the law. And of course, as a judge and as a justice, she really had an enormous amount of influence.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, she was remarkable, and we truly miss her. And I know you knew her well because of your work as chair of the Kenney Center.
Yes, she would come to the Kenney Center fairly regularly because she loved opera. And every time she was there and I would introduce her, she would get a 20-minute standing ovation. Presidents of the United States, when I would introduce them, they would get a 2-minute standing ovation. She would get a 20-minute standing ovation because people idolized her. And I think it was a combination of having come from very, very modest circumstances, become such a giant in the law, fighting for human rights and gender equality, but also she was so diminutive. People said, how can this small woman who didn't weigh 100 pounds manage to be so strong and so powerful? And also her exercise routine got a lot of attention. But in the end, I think it was the fact that she was a living legend and people admired that she had 4 bouts of cancer, yet she came back and back and back from them. In the end, she couldn't overcome the last bout of cancer, but she did come back to the court many, many times after having just had surgery or had an operation of some type.
Yeah, no, she was remarkable. The other interview that you had, which of course I kind of tend to lean towards women, I had to say, David, I mean, not that I'm being prejudiced on here, was the woman who was the CEO of Pepsi.
Right, that's Indra Nooyi.
Yes, yeah, fascinating interview. I mean, she was an immigrant from India, correct?
Yes, there are, in the Fortune 500, there are probably now less than 20 CEOs who are women. When she became CEO, there were probably less than 10 were women, but she was the only one who was an immigrant woman. And she became the head of Pepsi, which was pretty impressive. And she had a really good technique that she described in the interview, which is to bond her employees with her. She would send report cards to their parents about how they were doing.
Yes, I love it.
And of course, the report cards were pretty favorable. And so you imagine if your mother's calling you up and saying, you're very lucky to work for Indra Nooyi. She sent me a report card saying how great you are. You certainly want to keep working for her. It would kind of keep people there and not want to have them leave.
Well, I thought that was, yes. And actually that was one thing that really kind of stood out for me when I was reading the interview, the fact that she would send back notes to the parents, which quite frankly, I was going to share with my other colleagues because I think it was ingenious, to do. And the same kind of thing, actually, that I noted in the interview you had with Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google, which also fascinating because he said that he used to that he wanted people to eat together. He wanted employees to eat together.
Well, at Google, he has been a more traditional CEO in a company called Novell, and then he left that. And as he was leaving it, Google founders recruited him, and he had to kind of adapt to a different culture. At Google, when they were first started, and even now, they had a culture where anybody can come to work and kind of dress pretty much the way they want. They could bring their bike, they could bring their pets, they could bring their laundry, they could do whatever they wanted. And it was a very informal atmosphere. But to keep people from going out and eating and wasting time going outside to get food, they would serve free food to everybody for lunch and dinner. And that tradition is still there at Google.
So they would serve free food. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yes, they have very healthy foods, and they would serve it to people so people wouldn't have to go out and buy something and also take time. He also said that the culture was so unusual that one time when he left for a trip, he came back and somebody was in his office. And he said, what are you doing here? And he said, well, your office was empty, and I thought I would use it. And he said, well, I'm the CEO of the company. The guy said, that's okay, I don't mind. And so he used his office and they shared it for a couple of years.
That's amazing. And I was going to ask, do you do that as well? Do you give out free food at the Carlyle Group? I just want to know, but that's okay. No, it's a
Well,
great concept. It's a great concept. I mean,
and many of the other companies in Silicon Valley have adopted the same approach, which is to keep the people on the campus eating healthy food, which is very important.
So speaking of campuses, have you done any like campus? Well, at this point, of course, with COVID, but in the future, hopefully, when things do open up, I mean, this book, How to Lead, would be great to take on the road to campuses. And I mean, I can't tell you how much it would mean to business school, to the business school students, or to any student really, in technology or in engineering, or I mean, it's life lessons to succeed.
One of the lessons that I put in the first chapter is that life always doesn't work out perfectly at the beginning. And so you may not be a superstar or a leader in your first third of your life, but if you acquire certain skills in the second or third of your life, you can be a leader. And I observed that many people who are superstars when they're young, student body presidents, all-American athletes, Supreme Court clerks, Rhodes Scholars, they might be very good and have nice careers, but they don't quite live up to the potential sometimes as people who might have expected. But in the end, people who often run the world are people who weren't such superstars when they were younger. Think about presidents of the United States. Of the last 10 or so, probably only one, Bill Clinton, was somebody that people would say, yes, he's likely to be a president when he was a teenager or a young adult.
Right. Now, that's fascinating. I want to talk more about that. We're just going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching The Next Word. We are interviewing Mr. David Rubenstein, the American businessman, billionaire, philanthropist, and author of How to Lead. David, thank you again for being here. It's fascinating. Your book, which just came out in September, I think should be on every academic shelf in universities throughout the country. You interviewed 20, 30 people. I know many more, of course, throughout your shows that you have also periodically. And these are game changers. These are people who are game changers, from Colin Powell to Bill Clinton, to Eric Schmidt. It goes on and on. I mean, it's amazing that I wanted to ask you about that, actually. How did you get their time? I mean, I know you are David Rubenstein, but who did you have calling them, and how did you track them down to take the time to do these amazing interviews in this book?
Well, I know most of these people through other parts of my life.
Right.
So when you call somebody they generally find it harder to say no.
Right.
And so it wasn't that hard. I didn't really have anybody in the book that I didn't know reasonably well already.
Right. But you had some amazing people. So in it, of course, you interviewed Dr. Fauci, Anthony Fauci, who we've heard a lot about lately. And he talked about his life, and he pretty much, his vision, was pretty much to, I think he could have been a brain surgeon or a heart surgeon. But he went to NIH, and he's been at NIH for 36 plus years. He must have been, fascinating to interview. He's now close to 80. He is one of the things you asked him. He said, "Why? What makes you successful? Why is your agency and your institute so successful in what they do?" And he said, "Because I articulate to my team, I communicate to my team." I found that very, very insightful. But that's the one thing that he would raise with you. Can you talk a little bit more about that interview? And
I've known him for quite a while. His brother-in-law worked at our firm for about 10 years, and through his brother-in-law, I got to know him. And I tried to recruit him to Carlyle when he was 70 years old. I said, "Okay, you're ready to retire, right? Why don't you come into private equity, mankind's highest calling, and we can invest in the healthcare area?" And he said, "David, I don't really care about making money. I only care about helping people on infectious diseases. And so I'm going to do this as long as I can." And that was almost 10 years ago.
Wow.
He is a national treasure. he's obviously been through a lot of uh, turmoil lately, I would say, and a lot of criticism by some people. But in my view, he's a real profile in courage, and I really think that he has done a great service to our country. And I really hope he can stay there and do it another 10 years.
Right. No, he's phenomenal. And very another. And going back to some of the attributes that you talk about in the beginning of your book about humbleness. I mean, Dr. Fauci is very humble. He
Yes.
has he has tremendous integrity. He shares the credit, which you also talk about. He has I think the response, certainly the ability to respond to crises. And so let's talk about that actually, because I mean, a lot of the people you interviewed had to have that ability to respond to crises. I
Well,
mean, what?
there are three things I mentioned in my book you just referred to. Humility. I do think that there are arrogant leaders for sure, but on the whole, the ones I've interviewed have a fair amount of humility because I realize there's some luck in how they got to where they are. And I admire people that have humility. Secondly, Ronald Reagan famously said, there's no limit to what humans can accomplish if they're willing to share the credit. And I think people that share the credit can get a lot more done and are very good leaders. And I think that's a very important quality. And Anthony Fauci has both of those qualities quite well. He's also a very good communicator, and he's able to really communicate to people that work with him what he thinks. So I think he's an impressive person. I wish we had more federal servants as good as him. He's as good as you're going to get.
No, actually. So speaking of then, federal servants and public servants, you did interview, of course, Colin Powell, another interesting, individual, and I mean, I admire the man. I mean, a little bit about him. Can you
Yes.
talk?
Colin Powell was not a rock star when he was younger. His parents were Jamaican immigrants. He wasn't thought to be a superstar such that he was going to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or Secretary of State. Went to City College in New York. That's all his parents could afford. He was not an academic star there, but he graduated with a degree in geology. He went into ROTC, went into the military, and suffered a lot of racial discrimination when he was stationed in bases in the South. Went to Vietnam twice. He was wounded there, came back, and because of the strength of his intellect and his personality and humility, he rose up to the point where he became National Security Advisor and, as I said, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of State. I think he's a real national asset, and he overcame lots and lots of challenges. And I think had his family been interested in him doing it, he might have considered running for president. In 1996, he was importuned to do so. In the end, I think he felt he didn't have the fire in the belly. And I also think that his family wasn't anxious for him to do this, in part because I think they were afraid of his safety.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, back to your one of the other attributes that you talk about early in your book at the beginning, of course, is responding to crises, and certainly he had that incredible ability to do that, as well as General Petraeus, which you also, of course, interviewed. Um,
Yes. I think responding to a crisis is the real measure of a great leader. We probably wouldn't be celebrating Abraham Lincoln if there had been no Civil War. Lincoln was a very nice man, but he rose to the occasion. He dealt with the crisis. The same with FDR, a very nice man, not probably a towering intellect. And had he not had World War II to deal with, we might not be celebrating him quite the way that we do. The same is true of people like Colin Powell, who rose to the occasion in Kuwait, or David Petraeus, who led the surge in Iraq that was so successful after the initial invasion that was not going so well.
Right, right. Now, but and so most of the people in the book that you do, obviously all the people in the book that you interview, you knew them on some level. I mean, you knew them, of course. I mean, because there are many, many more, and I know there are many, many that you've interviewed on your own show, which I was interested to learn that you had interviewed the CEO of Netflix, which I find fascinating
Yes.
because I didn't know about Netflix until COVID, frankly, until COVID
Well,
happened. I'm now a big believer in Netflix.
yeah, I may be the only person in America who's not a subscriber to Netflix. I interviewed him. I read his book, but he didn't ask me if I use Netflix, and I don't. But he really invented that business of basically selling people on the idea of having streaming come in their homes with lots of different entertainment. It's a masterful business, and it's quite profitable. And he's very philanthropic with all the money he's made, and that's quite good.
And speaking of philanthropic, I mean, you have, I think You've done so much. I mean, let's face it. I mean, of course, my daughter would be pleased to know that you know that I didn't know this actually about the great panda um,
Right.
complex at the National Zoo, which listen, we all thank you for that.
Well, the pandas have some problems in reproducing. There is virtually no mammal that has as much of a challenge in reproducing as the
Really,
panda does. Fortunately, we just had a baby panda
they,
born,
they,
but through artificial insemination. And it was very unusual. The female was 22 years old, which is probably the equivalent of a 49 or 50-year-old woman. So not easy to get pregnant at that age. But through
wow,
artificial insemination with 5-year-old semen, it worked amazingly. And now the baby seems to be doing okay, but there are only about 1,600 pandas in the entire globe. And if we're not careful, there'll be none,
wow,
20 or 30 years. So we have to really be careful to make sure the species doesn't disappear from the face of the earth. They're the most popular species. People like looking at them because they're kind of cuddly. They are bears and they're
Dave,
dangerous, but they're cuddly. They have the black ears sticking out,
right,
the black right under their eyes,
right.
and the black and white, kind of fur. And so they are quite interesting. And when you look at them, most of the time, what are they doing? They're eating or sleeping. Why is that? Because their stomach is designed for vegetarians. I'm sorry, designed to be meat eaters, but they stopped eating meat, 500 years ago, or maybe 500,000 years ago, I should say. And so the stomach is still designed to eat meat, but in order to get enough nutrition, they have to eat a lot of vegetables and they eat a
Oh,
lot of
that's
bamboo.
interesting.
So they eat about
Fascinating.
12 hours a day to get enough nutrition to feed their stomach and their body. Well, if you eat 12 hours a day, you get tired. So they sleep a lot. So they don't do that much more than just sit there eating bamboo, walk around and then sleep. That's about what they do.
Right. Oh, I love it. Well, my daughter would be pleased to know that. I mean, she worked at the zoo,
Okay.
so yeah, so she was part of the membership team, and she loved, and that's all she talked about with the pandas. So I have to tell her that story. I, of course, did not know about. I knew a lot about it, but not that. But you're telling me it's great. But
Well,
that's one of
the female panda can reproduce generally only about one day a year. So think how few people there would be if humans could
what you're.
reproduce only one
Wow.
day a year. But this is basically the one day a year that they can reproduce. So it's not easy to do it, and often because they're inexperienced, they don't know where the parts are supposed to go, and so they fumble around a lot. And that's why you often have to do artificial insemination.
Oh, that's fascinating. We'll have to go to the zoo and check out the new, the panda. It's great though, David. I mean, but you've done so much for the city. I mean, let's face it, the Kennedy Center. I mean, the Washington Monument. I mean, the status of the monument is just beautiful, of course, and what you've done for the mall, which people don't realize. That mall. What it takes to run that type of mall, having served on the Smithsonian board myself, but I know you're the chair of the Smithsonian Institution, and you've done so much for for many of the programs within the family of the Smithsonian. Uh, Tell us the plans on the mall. I mean, that's still moving forward, of course. The underground
Sure. Well, not the
project.
underground. Well, I don't think the underground parking is going to occur, but the mall is something that is a natural. It's not a natural phenomenon. It wasn't there that way. It was designed to be a mall, really, in the way we now see it, probably around the early part of the last century, when there was a design to kind of improve the mall. But the mall is our front porch, in effect, the country's front porch, and has the museums lining it. But you've got the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial. And we need to do a lot more because the government of the United States does not have the
I
money
know.
to do all the things we're trying to do there. And so the Trust for the National Mall has done a wonderful job. Chip Ackridge,
Yes.
who started it, has done a wonderful
Yes.
job of kind of promoting the mall. And I've been trying to be helpful as well.
Oh, I know you have, and you've been, I mean, remarkable. And again, we owe a debt of gratitude, to you for that, Dave. I mean, it's just thank you for that as well as for the Kennedy Center, and I mean Johns Hopkins, and it just the list goes on and on and on. I mean, you truly, you are a giver, and that's I
Well,
know you've signed a great pledge, which is what to give up half of your fortune, or when you. Um,
yes. The Giving
that's
Pledge says I was one of the original 40 signers. There, it says you're going to give away half your net worth, or at least half your net worth.
right.
I'm actually trying to give away the bulk of it, mostly all of it. If I live a normal lifespan, I hope to be able to do that. But I'm now 71. My parents made it to 85 and 86. I hope I can get there. You never know. With COVID, you could be gone tomorrow.
Right,
And as we know,
right.
we've lost almost 220,000 Americans to this
I
terrible
know,
virus.
I know,
And so you have
I
to be
know.
very careful.
I know. And, but you came from good stock. I know, and I know you came from a great city of Baltimore, Maryland, which is not far from where I grew up. Um,
Where did you grow up?
so, well, actually, I grew up in Montgomery County,
Montgomery County.
but we're
Okay.
not too far, but I used to go to Baltimore all the time. And I'd love to go to Baltimore. And I would go, all the time. All my friends lived in Baltimore. So the food, everything is just the ethnic communities in
Right.
Baltimore were just, were just something that I loved, and I wish they were in every city.
It's an unusual city. When I was growing up, it was actually the ninth biggest city in the United States. It's now not even the top 20 because it's lost a lot of population to the
Yes,
suburbs. It
yes,
has a fair amount of crime now and some other
yes.
drug-related issues and other challenges. But hopefully, the city can be put together and ultimately can recover from some of its challenges. And so it's everybody has a fondness for the town that they grew up in, and I have a fondness for it as well. I interviewed Jeff Bezos for my book, and I pointed out in the book that our company, one of our Carlyle companies, was helpful in him getting started with
Ah,
Amazon.
that's
But
great.
he offered stock at the beginning. We didn't want it because we thought it was a startup. It wasn't going anywhere. Probably. Eventually, he gave us stock, and we then sold it at the IPO. It's worth about $7 billion today.
Unbelievable, unbelievable.
Mistake.
Well, Dave, you're amazing. I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you
And
very much for this conversation, and
oh,
congratulations on your
oh,
success in your show.
I was just telling somebody I'm gonna share it with them. I'm gonna share it with them, but I want it back because really it is about life through all these people and
Well,
all
thank you
their.
very much for saying that, and thank you for having me on. And in the end, I hope people enjoy the book.
You've been watching The Next Word. Thank you. Have a great evening. Good night.